June 18, 1942. Willow Run, Michigan. The immense factory floor stretched nearly a mile long, bathed in the harsh glow of industrial lighting as thousands of workers swarmed around the partially assembled aircraft frames. Oberst Wilhelm Muller, the Abwehr's top industrial intelligence officer in America, watched from a carefully choreographed tour group, mentally calculating the production capacity of what Henry Ford promised would be the greatest bomber plant in the world. The massive structure stretched over a mile long and covered 3.5 million square feet, roughly 70 football fields under a single roof. As Mueller observed workers installing massive jigs and tooling equipment, he made careful mental notes of everything he saw. "Impressive, isn't it?" asked the Ford executive leading the tour, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who introduced himself only as Thompson. "Certainly ambitious," Mueller replied carefully, maintaining his cover as a Swiss industrial journalist. "Though perhaps overly so. Aircraft aren't automobiles, after all." Thompson smiled thinly. "Mr. Ford disagrees. He says a bomber is just a bigger car that happens to fly." Based on German manufacturing experience, Mueller estimated the Americans might eventually produce one B-24 Liberator bomber every 5 to 6 days. Impressive, but hardly war-winning. He believed the Reich's technological superiority would easily overcome such numbers. After all, German engineers had spent decades perfecting aircraft design and construction techniques. The Americans were mere novices by comparison, with barely any heavy bomber production experience before the war. That evening, in his hotel room in Detroit, Mueller drafted his report for Berlin. "While the scale of the Willow Run facility is undeniably impressive," he wrote, "the American plan to mass-produce heavy bombers using automotive manufacturing techniques represents a fundamental misunderstanding of aviation engineering principles. They may achieve some success, but never at rates that would threaten the Reich's air superiority." He could not have been more catastrophically wrong. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how American industrial might, particularly Ford Motor Company's revolutionary application of mass production to aircraft manufacturing, didn't just change the material balance of World War II, but shattered the psychological foundation of German intelligence operations, leaving Nazi leadership blind to the true scale of the storm gathering against them. Captain Thomas Wilkinson guided his B-24 Liberator bomber through the cloudy skies over Bremen on October 8, 1943. His aircraft, nicknamed Detroit Special, was the 2,857th B-24 to roll off the Willow Run assembly line. The bomber carried a full payload of 8,000 pounds of high explosives destined for the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory. At 26,000 feet, Wilkinson checked his oxygen mask and surveyed the formation around him, 47 other B-24s, each from the same production month. Flying in the co-pilot's seat, Lieutenant Raymond Doherty whistled softly. "Something on your mind, Lieutenant?" Wilkinson asked through the intercom. "Just thinking, sir. My cousin works at Willow Run. Says they're pushing out a bomber every 63 minutes now." "Round the clock," Doherty replied, adjusting the mixture controls. "That's more than 20 planes a day." Bombardier Sergeant Frank Kowalski cut in from his position in the nose. "Hard to believe." "Believe it," Wilkinson said. "And the Krauts have no idea." As their conversation continued, Oberleutnant Heinz Fischer sat in a concrete bunker beneath the Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin. As an analyst in the Technical Intelligence Division, Fischer's job was to assess American aircraft production capabilities based on serial numbers from downed bombers, manufacturing stamps, and reports from agents in the field. A telephone rang at the adjacent desk. Captain Werner Hoffmann, his supervisor, answered it, his face growing increasingly pale as he listened. After hanging up, Hoffmann approached Fischer's desk with a sheet of paper. "New serial numbers from AB-24 shot down near Emden yesterday," he said grimly. "Cross-reference these with our production estimates." Fischer took the paper, his eyes widening as he entered the numbers into his log book. "This cannot be correct," he whispered. "If these numbers are sequential, it would mean—" He recalculated, then looked up at Hoffmann. "It would mean they've produced over 3,000 B-24s from a single factory." Hoffmann's jaw tightened. "That's more than all of our Jew." 88 production last year. It's impossible, Fisher insisted. No aircraft factory could produce at such rates. The intelligence must be flawed. Back in Washington, D.C., Colonel Harold Miller reviewed the latest reports from the Army Air Force's Statistical Control Division. The 35-year-old former economics professor had been tasked with tracking aircraft production for the War Production Board. On his desk sat a confidential telephone directory-sized volume titled Report on War Progress. Page 47 displayed a stunning chart. American factories had produced 4,013 combat aircraft in August 1943 alone, more than Germany had built in the previous 6 months. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant accounted for nearly a quarter of those numbers. Miller's secretary knocked and entered his office. "Sir, General Arnold wants these numbers verified again. The president is briefing Stalin tomorrow on Lend-Lease commitments." Miller tapped his pencil on the report. "The numbers are correct, Margaret. In fact, they're conservative. Tell the general that Ford will hit 1 bomber per hour by December. We're holding that detail back from the official reports for now." She nodded and left. Miller turned to the window, watching raindrops track down the glass. The true miracle, he reflected, wasn't just the number of planes. It was how Henry Ford had fundamentally reimagined aircraft manufacture. At Willow Run, 22-year-old Rosalind Carter pulled her hair back and secured it with a bandana as she prepared for her shift on the assembly line. One of the 42,000 workers at the plant, Rosalind had been a beautician before the war. Now she installed electrical wiring systems in B-24 bombers, complicated work requiring both precision and speed. Her section was responsible for installing 3,085 feet of wiring in each bomber, comprising approximately 95 separate electrical systems. "Morning, Rosie," called Walter Jenkins, a 58-year-old former auto worker who supervised her station. "They're pushing us to trim another 2 minutes off the installation time today." "2 more minutes?" Rosalind sighed, pulling on her work gloves. "We're already down to 83 minutes from 120 last month. I swear, Mr. Ford won't be happy until we're building these things faster than cars." Walter chuckled. "That's exactly what he wants. Before the war, we built a Model T every 90 seconds. Now we're down to a bomber every 63 minutes. And they're saying we'll hit 60 flat by Christmas." "A bomber a minute," Rosalind marveled. "My brother's over in England flying these things. Says the Germans don't believe how many we're making." As they spoke, the immense overhead cranes were already positioning another partially completed B-24 fuselage at their station. The assembly line never stopped, 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. The plant had produced its first bomber in September 1942. By early 1943, they were producing 1 aircraft every 160 minutes. Now, in October 1943, they were approaching 1 per hour. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, stared incredulously at the production figures presented by General Adolf Galland. "These numbers cannot be accurate," he insisted, his face flushing red beneath his ornate uniform. "No nation can build aircraft at such rates. Our spies must be compromised." Galland remained stoic. "The evidence is conclusive, Herr Reichsmarschall. Serial numbers, shipping manifests, reconnaissance photos of airfields in England, they all confirm these figures. The Americans built more heavy bombers last month than we built fighters." "It's a deception," Göring declared, thumping his fist on the mahogany desk. "They're falsifying serial numbers, creating dummy aircraft. The Americans are businessmen, not warriors. With respect, the bombs falling on our cities are not dummies," Galland replied quietly. Göring's expression darkened. "Have military intelligence recheck these figures. I want our agents in Detroit to physically count the aircraft leaving these factories. This Ford, he's an admirer of Germany. He received our Grand Cross of the German Eagle. He cannot have betrayed us like this." What Göring didn't understand was that Henry Ford's personal politics were irrelevant to the industrial juggernaut he had created. Ford had revolutionized manufacturing once with the moving assembly line for automobiles. Now his company was doing it again with aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, who would later lead the famous Tokyo raid, had visited Willow Run in 1941 during its construction. "This isn't an aircraft factory," he had observed. "It's an automobile plant that happens to be building airplanes." That was precisely its strength. While German aircraft were largely handcrafted by skilled laborers, the Ford approach broke construction down into simplified, standardized steps that could be performed by workers with minimal training. The plant's mile-long assembly line moved continuously, with bombers progressing from station to station via a conveyor system. The differences in production philosophy were stark. At Focke-Wulf's plant in Bremen, each FW-190 fighter required approximately 12,700 man-hours to complete. Each aircraft was essentially a handcrafted masterpiece, with skilled technicians fitting and adjusting components individually. Engineers frequently implemented design improvements mid-production, resulting in numerous subvariants with different parts that weren't interchangeable. In contrast, Ford's approach at Willow Run prioritized standardization above all else. Engineers weren't allowed to make even minor improvements without demonstrating that the change wouldn't disrupt production flow. Parts were designed with generous tolerances to ensure they would fit together without hand-fitting. The workforce was largely untrained in aviation, with many having never seen an airplane before the war. The German approach creates better individual aircraft, explained Ford's chief production engineer in a confidential War Department report. Our approach creates an unstoppable flood of good-enough aircraft. The numbers told the story. At Willow Run, man-hours per B-24 bomber, an aircraft 5 times larger than the FW-190, had been reduced from 200,000 hours to just 18,000 by mid-1943. Put another way, each American worker at Willow Run produced more than 10 times the aircraft tonnage of their German counterpart. While most German manufacturing still relied on craftsmen, often working with hand tools, Willow Run featured 9,000 different machines and tools, many custom designed specifically for aircraft production. The entire facility covered 3.5 million square feet, the largest factory under a single roof in the world at that time. At the Abwehr headquarters in Berlin, Wilhelm Canaris, head of German military intelligence, called an emergency meeting of his top industrial espionage experts. The room was filled with cigarette smoke and tension as Canaris entered. "Gentlemen, the Führer has demanded answers," Canaris began without preamble. "How have we so catastrophically underestimated American production capacity?" Oberst Muller, recently returned from his American posting, stood. "Herr Admiral, our estimates were based on traditional aircraft manufacturing methods. What Ford has done at Willow Run is unprecedented." He swallowed hard. "They've applied automobile mass production techniques to bomber construction. Our agents report that 70% of their workforce had never seen an aircraft before the war. They're using women, old men, even the disabled, all trained to perform specific, limited tasks." "And the results?" Canaris asked. "One B-24 bomber every 63 minutes, sir. Approximately 650 per month from a single factory." Muller's voice was hollow. "More heavy bombers than the entire Luftwaffe's monthly production of all aircraft types combined." The room fell silent. Finally, an intelligence analyst named Schmidt spoke up. "Our agents must be compromised. These numbers cannot be real." Muller shook his head. "I've seen it myself. The plant is over a mile long. They bring in raw aluminum and rubber at one end and roll out completed bombers at the other. They've reduced the most complex aircraft in their inventory to an assembly line process, like making automobiles or refrigerators." Canaris dismissed the meeting shortly afterward. As the officers filed out, he remained seated, contemplating the implications. The Reich had built its strategy on the assumption of German technological superiority overcoming the Allies' numerical advantages. But what if the numerical gap became so vast that no technological edge could compensate? He picked up the phone. "Get me Field Marshal Keitel," he told his secretary, "and prepare a condensed report on American industrial capacity for the Führer. Remove any mention of Ford's assembly line innovations. Focus on the possibility of sabotage to our intelligence networks." Canaris understood something that many in the Nazi leadership refused to acknowledge. Hitler couldn't handle the truth about American production capacity. The myth of German technological supremacy was too central to Nazi ideology. Back at Willow Run, Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator with well-known pro-German sympathies before Pearl Harbor, toured the facility as part of his role as a consultant for Ford. Despite his previous political positions, even he was awestruck by what he witnessed. "It's beyond anything I could have imagined," he told Henry Ford II, who had taken over much of his aging grandfather's responsibilities. "The Germans have nothing remotely comparable. We're applying what we learned building cars," Ford replied. "Breaking down complex tasks, standardizing components, creating foolproof assembly methods. My grandfather always said manufacturing is about removing wasted motion and wasted materials." As they walked the floor, they passed station after station where components were being assembled with remarkable speed. In one area, workers installed the 13 fuel tanks that would give the B-24 its 2,850-mile range. In another, the 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 twin Wasp engines were being mounted to the wings. Each engine delivered 1,200 horsepower and would give the fully loaded bomber a top speed of 290 miles per hour. The engines themselves came from other plants operating on similar principles. Pratt & Whitney had increased production from 1,000 engines per month in 1941 to over 15,000 per month by 1943. "We had to redesign the aircraft for mass production," explained the chief engineer who accompanied them. "The original consolidated design used 30,000 unique rivets. We standardized down to just 12 types." Lindbergh nodded. "In Germany, they'd use hundreds of different rivets, each one specifically engineered for its particular application. And that's why they'll lose," Ford said simply. In November 1943, Major Erich Schult of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm found himself standing in a prisoner of war processing center in Frankfurt, interviewing downed American bomber crews. His task was to extract technical information about the aircraft and their origins. A young American lieutenant sat across from him, his flight jacket still stained with hydraulic fluid and blood from a wound on his forehead. "Your name and rank?" Schult asked in perfect English, honed during his pre-war years at Harvard University. "First Lieutenant James Cooper, United States Army Air Forces, serial number 0 to 735,982. The American replied mechanically. "Where was your aircraft manufactured, Lieutenant Cooper?" Schult kept his tone conversational. Cooper shrugged. "Willow Run. Same as most of them." "And when was it built?" "Last month. September 28th. Flew it from Detroit to England with minimal modifications. That's how we do it now." Schult made a note, then showed Cooper a log book. "These are the serial numbers of B-24s we've shot down in the past 3 months. Over 200 bombers. Yet the sequence suggests they represent less than half of 1 month's production from this Willow Run. Is that accurate?" Cooper's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent. "Let me be clear, Lieutenant," Schult continued. "This isn't military information I'm seeking. I'm trying to understand how your Ford company has achieved what our engineers insist is impossible." After a moment, Cooper replied, "My father works for Ford in Dearborn. Before the war, they made cars. Now they make bombers. It's the same principle, assembly line, interchangeable parts, unskilled labor performing simple, repeated tasks. Henry Ford figured it out 40 years ago with the Model T." Schult stared at him. "But aircraft are infinitely more complex than automobiles." Cooper shook his head. "Not to Ford, they're not. Just bigger components moving down a longer line." Later that evening, Schult wrote in his report, "American production methodology represents a fundamentally different conceptual approach to industrial output, one that prioritizes quantity and standardization over craftsmanship and technical refinement. While our engineers focus on creating the optimal design regardless of production difficulty, the Americans design specifically for mass production, accepting technical compromises to achieve overwhelming numerical superiority." His report was filed, read by several mid-level officers, then shelved. It contradicted the prevailing belief among Nazi leadership that American equipment was inherently inferior due to mass production methods. This belief persisted despite mounting evidence to the contrary. By early 1944, even Hitler could no longer deny the production disparity. In a rage-filled monologue recorded by his staff, he blamed German industrialists for failing to match American output. "They promised me precision engineering would overcome the enemy's material advantage," he shouted. "Now the skies are black with American bombers. and they tell me it's impossible to match their production. Nothing is impossible. Ford builds a bomber every hour. Why can't Messerschmitt do the same? The answer was complex but fundamental. Germany's entire industrial culture prioritized engineering excellence over production efficiency. German manufacturers employed highly skilled craftsmen using specialized techniques, while American industry had embraced standardization, interchangeability, and assembly line production decades earlier. Nazi Germany couldn't replicate Ford's achievement because its industrial philosophy was diametrically opposed to the principles that made mass production possible. German fighter pilot Hans-Joachim Marseille experienced the consequences of this disparity firsthand. Patrolling near Leipzig in February 1944, his squadron of 12 Bf-109s encountered a formation of over 200 B-17s and B-24s, escorted by nearly 100 P-51 Mustangs. It was like facing an oncoming weather front, he later wrote in his diary. The bomber formation stretched from horizon to horizon. We attacked as ordered, but it was futile, like trying to stop a flood with a handful of rocks. I shot down 2 bombers before running out of ammunition and fuel. When we landed, 3 of our 12 aircraft returned. The bombers continued to their target. The next day, Marseille was shown aerial reconnaissance photographs of Ford's Willow Run plant. The massive facility, with its parking lots filled with thousands of workers' cars and its airfield lined with newly completed bombers, left him stunned. How can we win against this? He asked his intelligence officer. The Führer says American quality is poor, the officer replied without conviction. Their aircraft break down frequently, and their crews are untrained. Marseille laughed bitterly. Tell that to Krupp and Tyson, he said, naming 2 German cities recently devastated by American bombing raids. Their bombs seemed to work well enough. Meanwhile, at Willow Run, production continued to accelerate. By December 1943, the plant achieved its goal of 1 bomber every 60 minutes. By April 1944, as the Allies prepared for D-Day, the rate had improved to 1 every 55 minutes. A completed B-24 bomber contained 1,550,000 separate parts, 360,000 rivets, and enough wiring to stretch from Detroit to Chicago. One particularly innovative aspect of Ford's operation was its use of women workers, who eventually comprised 40% of Willow Run's workforce. Rosalind Carter was promoted to crew supervisor in early 1944, overseeing a team of 35 women who installed electrical systems. The men didn't think we could handle the technical aspects at first, she recalled in a post-war interview. But Mr. Ford's system meant you didn't need to understand the entire aircraft, just your specific task. I became an expert at my station, then learned the stations before and after mine, and eventually understood the entire electrical system. Walter Jenkins, who had initially trained Rosalind, nodded with approval when she received her promotion. You've got good hands and a better head, he told her. These planes need both. The impact of Willow Run's production miracle extended beyond the battlefield. It fundamentally altered German intelligence operations. By mid-1944, the Abwehr had essentially stopped trying to track individual American aircraft production, focusing instead on broader strategic information. Counting their aircraft is pointless, Wilhelm Canaris reportedly told his staff. It only demoralizes our analysts. Focus on their operational plans, not their industrial capacity. This strategic blindness contributed to Germany's failure to anticipate the scale of the Allied invasion of Normandy. Having given up on accurately tracking production numbers, German intelligence was unable to gauge the true size of the force being assembled in England. After D-Day, as Allied forces pushed into France and bombers continued to pound German cities and factories, the Reich's industrial production began to collapse under the weight of round-the-clock bombing. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of Nazi Germany, was reduced to a token force, unable to defend German airspace and increasingly grounded by fuel shortages. In a final, desperate attempt to regain air superiority, the Reich turned to technological wonder weapons like the Me-262 jet fighter. While technically superior to any Allied fighter, the Germans could produce only 1,400 of these advanced aircraft throughout the entire war. In contrast, Ford's Willow Run plant alone produced 8,685 B-24 bombers between 1942 and 1945. The production disparity extended far beyond aircraft. By 1944, the United States was producing 17 times more military equipment by dollar value than it had in 1941. American factories built 2.6 million military trucks during the war, more than all the trucks Germany, Italy, and Japan produced combined. Ford alone built more military equipment than the entire Italian war economy. One should not ask where the American production miracle came from. General George Patton reportedly remarked, "This is who they are. They built transcontinental railroads in 3 years and skyscrapers in 1. Their entire national character is built on doing the impossible faster than anyone thinks possible." For the German military, the psychological impact was as devastating as the material one. Luftwaffe fighter pilots, flying increasingly outdated aircraft against overwhelming numbers, developed a fatalistic outlook. Pilot morale plummeted as they realized the mathematical impossibility of their task. "We shot down hundreds of their bombers," wrote fighter ace Adolf Galland after the war, "but they kept coming, day after day, in greater numbers each time. We never had a chance." Perhaps the most telling assessment came from Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, who wrote after the war, "The decisive moment was not when the first American bombers appeared over Germany, but when I saw the aerial photographs of their factories. They built bombers the way we built bicycles, and in quantities I had considered mathematically impossible. The true American secret weapon wasn't the atomic bomb, it was their production system." By May 1945, as Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, the last B-24 bombers were rolling off the Willow Run assembly line. The plant that had produced nearly half of all Liberator bombers built during the war would soon be converted back to automobile production. Captain Thomas Wilkinson, who had flown the Detroit Special over Bremen in 1943, returned to Michigan after completing his tour of duty. On his last day in uniform, he drove to Willow Run and stood outside the massive facility, watching workers change shifts. A woman exiting the plant noticed his uniform and approached. It was Rosalind Carter, still wearing her work bandana. "Pilot?" she asked, noticing his wings. Wilkinson nodded. "B-24s. I wanted to see where they were born before heading home." Rosalind smiled proudly. "I probably worked on yours." "Which one?" "Tail number 297542. We called her the Detroit Special." Her eyes widened. "September 1943 production. I was on electrical systems then." She paused. "Did she treat you right?" "Brought me home from 25 missions," Wilkinson replied. "Took damage a few times, but always got us back. Solid aircraft. We built them to bring you home," Rosalind said simply. As the war ended, the German intelligence officers who had failed to comprehend America's productive capacity faced a reckoning. Many had been unable to see beyond their own industrial paradigm, dismissing reports of Ford's achievements as propaganda or exaggeration. As the war ended, the German intelligence officers who had failed to comprehend America's productive capacity faced a reckoning. Many had been unable to see beyond their own industrial paradigm, dismissing reports of Ford's achievements as propaganda or exaggeration. Oberst Wilhelm Muller, who had toured Willow Run before the plant reached full production, was interrogated by American intelligence officers in August 1945. The interrogation took place in a small room at a processing center for German intelligence personnel in Frankfurt. Colonel David Harrison, a former Detroit automotive executive now serving in Army intelligence, led the questioning. "Why didn't you accurately report what you saw at Willow Run?" Harrison asked, sliding photographs of the plant across the table. Muller studied the images. Massive assembly halls filled with partially completed bombers moving steadily along seemingly endless production lines. He traced a finger along one photograph showing the plant's mile-long main building. "I reported exactly what I saw," Muller finally responded. "But I interpreted it through German eyes. When Ford said they would build a bomber an hour, I thought it was American boasting. In Germany, we would say an exceptional aircraft factory might eventually produce one per day. The concept of one per hour seemed like fantasy. But you saw the assembly line, the production methods," Harrison pressed. "I saw them. But I didn't understand their implications, Mueller admitted, removing his wire-rimmed glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. We believe craftsmanship could not be replaced by mass production for something as complex as an aircraft. We were wrong. Harrison nodded, making notes. Did Hitler ever receive accurate reports about our production capabilities? Mueller gave a bitter laugh. By 1943, most intelligence officers stopped sending realistic estimates. The Führer would fly into a rage, accusing us of defeatism or believing enemy propaganda. So reports were adjusted to be more optimistic. And the consequence? The consequence was that our entire strategic planning was based on fantasy, Mueller said quietly. We were fighting ghosts, never understanding the true nature of the industrial giant we had provoked. The legacy of Willow Run extended far beyond World War II. It demonstrated that even the most complex manufacturing challenges could be solved through standardization, simplification, and assembly line techniques. After the war, these lessons were applied to everything from televisions to computers, establishing American manufacturing dominance for decades to come. The silent victory of Ford's bomber plant was perhaps best summarized by Winston Churchill, who reportedly remarked after carefully reviewing production figures in 1943. The United States is like a giant boiler. Once the fire is lighted under it, there is no limit to the power it can generate. For Nazi Germany, the realization came too late. By the time they understood the true nature of the industrial behemoth they faced, thousands of bombers were already darkening the skies over the Reich, each one a testament to the power of American mass production. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.